The evening was meant to be perfect. A large hall stood glowing under soft golden lights with long tables covered in white cloth and shining glass. Expensive cars lined the entrance one after another as rich guests stepped out wearing polished shoes and fine dresses. Laughter filled the air, mixed with the sound of music and clinking glasses. This was not just any gathering. It was a charity event, hosted by one of the most powerful businessmen in the city, a man known for his wealth, influence, and rare public appearances. Every guest had been carefully invited. Business owners, politicians, famous faces, and people who had never worried about money in their lives moved freely through the hall. They greeted each other with smiles that often hid pride and competition. Everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone wanted to belong. Near the entrance, security staff checked names and guided people inside. Most guests walked in with confidence, already knowing where they stood in the world. Then, quietly, a woman arrived who did not fit the picture. She stepped out of an old, modest car. Her dress was clean but worn, clearly used many times. Her shoes were simple, not made for events like this. She held a small handbag close to her chest, as if it carried something precious. Her hair was neatly tied back, showing a tired but gentle face. She paused for a moment before entering, taking a slow breath as if gathering strength. Some guests noticed her right away. Their eyes followed her, curious at first, then doubtful. A few exchanged quick looks, raising their brows. Whispers began to float through the air. Who invited her? Someone muttered. She looks lost, another said softly, though not softly enough. The woman heard none of this clearly, but she felt it. She had learned to recognize the weight of judgment without words. Still, she walked forward, her steps calm but careful. At the entrance, the staff checked her invitation. For a brief second, one of them hesitated, looking at her and then at the card again. But the name was there, written clearly. Without saying much, he nodded and let her in. Inside, the hall felt even larger. The lights were brighter, the voices louder. The widow stood near the wall, unsure of where to go. She did not reach for food or drinks. She simply observed, taking in the scene like someone watching a world they no longer belonged to. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her bag. Inside it were papers folded many times, edges worn soft. They were old, but important. She had almost not come. Many times she had thought of turning back. But something inside her told her she had to be here tonight. Across the room, small groups formed. People talked about business deals, overseas trips, and future plans. Some laughed loudly, confident that everyone wanted to hear them. As the widow slowly moved along the side of the hall, a woman in a shining dress glanced at her and frowned. "Is she staff?" The woman asked the man beside her. "Doesn't look like it," he replied, scanning the widow from head to toe. "Maybe she came for free food." They both laughed. The widow stopped near a pillar, her face warm with quiet embarrassment. She lowered her eyes, not wanting attention. Her thoughts drifted far away, back to a time when life had been simpler. Years ago, she had also worn fine clothes. She had once attended events with her husband, standing proudly beside him. He had been kind, hard-working, and respected in his own way. They had not been rich, but they had enough. Most of all, they had peace. That peace was gone now. A sudden loss had changed everything. After her husband passed away, life became a long test of patience and survival. Bills piled up. Friends disappeared. Doors closed one by one. She learned how quickly people stop seeing you once you no longer have anything to offer. Tonight, standing in this hall full of wealth, she felt that truth more strongly than ever. Nearby, a group of men laughed loudly. One of them pointed in her direction without hiding it. "This event is getting strange," he said. "First-class food, first-class people, and then this." Another man chuckled. "Maybe the host is trying to show kindness. Letting anyone in these days?" The widow heard fragments of their words. Her chest tightened, but she did not respond. She had learned silence a long time ago. Silence was safer. She moved closer to a window, where the noise felt softer. Outside, city lights shimmered like distant stars. For a moment, She imagined leaving, walking back into the quiet night. No one would stop her. No one would care. But then she remembered why she came. She remembered a cold evening long ago. A stranger standing in the rain, hungry and broken, asking for nothing but a chance. She remembered opening her door when she herself had little. She remembered choosing kindness when it would have been easier to turn away. That memory gave her strength. Across the hall, the host finally arrived. The room shifted instantly. Conversations paused. Heads turned. This man did not need to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone was enough. He moved slowly, greeting people with calm confidence. From a distance, his eyes scanned the room. They stopped, just for a second, on the widow near the window. Something in her posture caught his attention. Something familiar. He did not approach her yet. Instead, he continued greeting guests, listening, observing. He noticed the looks being thrown her way. He noticed the quiet smiles, the hidden laughs. His expression did not change, but his eyes grew thoughtful. Meanwhile, the widow felt the room closing in on her. A server passed by, offering drinks. She shook her head politely. Hunger was not why she came. Money was not why she came. A woman nearby leaned toward her friend and spoke with clear disrespect. Some people just don't know where they belong, she said, glancing at the widow. The widow's fingers tightened around her bag. Her heart ached, but she stayed. Leaving now would mean letting fear win, and she had already lost too much in life to lose her dignity as well. Music softened as the event prepared to move into its main program. Guests were asked to take their seats. The widow remained standing at the back, unsure if she was even expected to sit. No one invited her to join them. No chair was pulled out for her. She stood alone, yet unseen by most. The host watched her once more. This time, longer. And in that moment, he knew that tonight was not just about charity or wealth. It was about a truth that had waited many years to be spoken, and soon. Everything was going to change. The laughter started softly, a ripple that grew louder as the evening progressed. The rich guests, with their polished manners and careful smiles, had begun to notice the widow more closely. At first, it was a glance or a whisper. Then someone spoke louder, letting everyone near them hear. "Look at her dress," one woman said, pointing subtly but with clear amusement. "I can't believe she came here like that," her friend snickered. "Maybe she thought this was a different kind of event. Perhaps she doesn't even know anyone here." The widow stood near the wall, trying to make herself small. She knew their words were for her, though they did not call her name. Her hands trembled slightly, gripping her bag. She felt the weight of judgment pressing down, and she wondered if she had made a mistake coming. The music in the hall continued, soft and elegant, but it seemed to emphasize her isolation. Groups of people laughed and clinked glasses, creating a world that felt distant and unreachable. She imagined herself outside, in the quiet, where no one's eyes could judge her. Then a man, one of the wealthiest in the room, leaned toward his companions and whispered something. The friends turned and laughed outright, a sound that echoed against the high ceiling. They did not bother to hide their amusement. They pointed subtly at the widow as if to say, "Can you believe this?" The widow's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She had lived long enough to know that people often spoke without thinking, without realizing the effect of their words. But this was different. This was public. The laughter cut deeper because it was open for all to see. She wanted to leave. She imagined herself stepping out quietly, walking past the shiny cars and polite staff, leaving behind the clinking glasses and whispers. It would be easy to disappear. But something inside her stopped her. She had come for a reason. She could not leave until she saw it through. A young man in a sleek suit leaned closer to his friends, laughing as he whispered, "Do you think she knows anyone here? She looks like she just walked in from the street." The group erupted in laughter again. The widow could feel the sting of each word, each glance, but she did not respond. She had learned long ago that words could not harm her unless she let them. Nearby, a server carried a tray of drinks. He noticed her standing alone and hesitated, unsure if he should offer her anything. She shook her head politely, refusing. She did not need food or drink. She needed courage. The laughter continued, growing bolder. One woman, leaning against a pillar, whispered loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "I wonder why he invited her. She doesn't belong here." "She can't belong here," another guest joined in, nodding. "Perhaps it's some kind of charity idea. You know, making her feel included while everyone watches. It's almost like entertainment." The widow's hands clenched her bag. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered her husband. He had taught her dignity and patience. He had taught her to respond to unkindness with quiet strength. She drew in a slow breath, holding on to the memory, and slowly opened her eyes. At that moment, the host of the event walked across the room. His presence was calm but commanding. Heads turned automatically as he moved, and a hush settled over the immediate area. The widow felt the shift in energy, the quiet that comes when someone truly respected enters a space. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, he continued greeting guests, shaking hands, nodding and smiling, but his eyes, sharp and observant, returned to her several times. He noticed the tension, the whispers, and the quiet courage in her stance. He made a mental note of it, though he said nothing. Meanwhile, the widow remained where she was, feeling every glance and hearing every word. She felt small, but she also felt a spark of determination. She remembered why she had come. Years ago, she had made a choice that required courage, a choice that would change lives. And tonight, she had to trust that choice once more. One man approached, smirking as he adjusted his cufflinks. "It's amazing how people think they belong somewhere just because they received an invitation," he said. "She's clearly out of place." Another guest laughed, raising a glass as if to toast the widow's misplacement. "A lesson for all of us," he added mockingly. "Always make sure you know your crowd." The widow's hand shook, but her face remained composed. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that appearances could deceive. What they saw was only a thin layer of her life. Beneath it, there was history, pain, courage that they could never understand. A few children of the wealthy families ran past, giggling and pointing. One whispered to the other, "Look at that lady. She's so different." Her presence, small and quiet, seemed to magnify in contrast to the sparkling gowns and polished shoes around her. People continued to whisper, laugh, and judge. But through it all, she held her dignity. She had nothing left to prove to them, and yet she could not leave. Not yet. The host returned to her line of sight, stopping briefly to observe. He noticed how the rich guests laughed at her, how they tried to humiliate her without knowing her story. His eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful. He knew that what would happen next would not be ordinary. The widow, feeling the weight of the room, stood straight. She adjusted her bag and moved slightly, positioning herself near a pillar. She listened to the conversations, feeling the sting but also building a quiet strength. Every laugh, every mocking comment, only reminded her why she had come tonight. She remembered the faces of people she had helped when she had little herself. The kindness she had given, the sacrifices she had made, and the choices that had cost her everything had shaped her life. They did not see her story. They only saw what they wanted to see, a poor widow, unworthy of attention. A server returned with another tray, this time holding small plates of food. He looked at her with uncertainty. She shook her head again, refusing politely. She did not come for food. She came to be present, to be seen by someone who truly mattered. The music shifted slightly, signaling that the event was moving toward the main program. The rich guests gathered at their tables, their conversations continuing, but the whispers about her had grown louder. People leaned across tables to talk about her, speculating and judging. The widow remained standing, unnoticed by most, but not by the host. He had watched carefully, understanding that the night was not just about appearances or charity. It was about a deeper truth, one that could not be measured by wealth or social standing. As the lights softened and the program began, the rich guests continued to laugh and whisper, believing they held the power. But in the quiet strength of the widow, a story was waiting to unfold. One that would change the room forever. Years ago, life had been very different for the widow. She had lived with her husband in a small but happy home. Their house was not large, and they had little money, but it was filled with love, laughter, and a sense of safety. They had meals together, shared dreams, and spoke of the future with hope. Her husband worked hard, and she managed the home with care. They did not need wealth to feel rich. They had each other, and that was enough. Then, everything changed. One day, a sudden accident took her husband away from her. The world she had known crumbled in an instant. She was left alone, without the person who had been her partner, her protector, and her closest friend. The days that followed were filled with grief so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing on her chest. Simple tasks became mountains. Each morning, she faced a new emptiness she had never known before. Without her husband, bills began to pile up. Rent, utilities, and basic necessities became struggles that seemed impossible. People who once called on her occasionally vanished, unwilling or unable to offer help. She learned quickly that when someone has nothing, society often treats them as though they do not exist. Despite her struggles, the widow never gave up completely. She found small ways to survive. She took odd jobs helping neighbors with cleaning, cooking, or sewing. Every coin she earned was carefully saved, and every meal was stretched to feed her. Life was hard, lonely, and exhausting, but she endured. Carrying the memory of her husband and the lessons he had left her, one day, a few years after her husband's death, she encountered a young man in the street. He looked exhausted, hungry, and hopeless. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and a small, tattered bag. People passed him without a second glance, ignoring his struggle. The widow saw him, and without thinking, she offered help. She shared food from her own limited supply, gave him a place to rest for the night, and offered encouragement when he had none. He did not ask for wealth or favors, only kindness and understanding. That act of compassion was small, almost invisible at the time. The widow did not know then that the young man would rise to become one of the most powerful people in the city. She did not expect gratitude, reward, or recognition. She only acted because it was the right thing to do in her heart. She believed that helping someone in need was more important than worrying about her own situation. Life continued to challenge. The widow faced sickness, loneliness, and repeated setbacks. Yet the memory of the young man she had helped gave her a sense of quiet pride. Even in hardship, she had been able to make a difference. She had proven to herself that no matter how poor or powerless she might seem, she could still do something meaningful. Years passed, and the world around her changed. The city grew taller, richer, and busier. People forgot the widow's story, seeing only a woman dressed modestly, struggling to get by. They did not know that beneath her simple appearance was a heart that had touched lives in ways no one could measure. Tonight, as she stood in the grand hall, surrounded by wealth and laughter, all those memories came back. She remembered the young man, now a powerful figure, who owed part of his success to her kindness. She remembered the evenings spent quietly, sewing or cooking, saving money to survive. She remembered the love of her husband, the heartbreak of loss, and the courage that had kept her moving forward. Her hands rested lightly on her bag, which now contained documents she had prepared carefully. These papers were not valuable in the eyes of the rich guests, but they represented something important to her. They were reminders of a life lived with integrity, of decisions made with courage, and of acts of kindness that would one day be acknowledged. As the laughter continued around her, she realized that those mocking her knew nothing of her life. They had judged her in seconds based on appearance alone. They had no idea about the struggles she had overcome, the courage she had shown, or the people she had helped along the way. The widow allowed herself a small smile. She did not feel anger toward the guests. She had learned long ago that resentment only hurt the person holding it. Instead, she felt a quiet confidence. She had survived loss, poverty, and loneliness. She had acted with kindness when it mattered most. And tonight her story was not yet finished. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the host of the event watching her again. There was something different in his gaze tonight. It was not just observation. It was recognition. She could not see his thoughts, but she sensed a connection, something unspoken yet significant. Perhaps he saw the truth she carried within. The story that no amount of wealth or laughter could erase. The widow's mind drifted to the young man she had helped so long ago. She did not know if he remembered her, but she hoped that someday someone would understand the importance of her actions. She had given selflessly, not expecting a return. But hope had a quiet way of surviving, even in the hardest hearts. Meanwhile, the guests continued their entertainment, oblivious to the story that stood quietly among them. They whispered, laughed, and judged without thought. To them, the widow was nothing more than an object of amusement. A distraction in a world that celebrated wealth above all else. But she stood firm, grounded in her past and the strength it had given her. Every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this moment. Every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every tear shed in solitude had built resilience, courage, and patience. The widow took a deep breath. Feeling the weight of the night and the memories of her past mingling with the present, she knew that soon the story she carried would intersect with the life of the man she had helped. The powerful figure now sitting among the wealthy guests. She did not yet know how, but she felt it coming. There was a sense of destiny, a quiet promise that the truth she had lived would finally be revealed. She straightened her shoulders and held her head high, letting the hall, the laughter, and the whispers wash over her without breaking her composure. The past had taught her endurance, the present demanded courage, and the future promised recognition that no one in that room could deny tonight. The widow was no longer just a figure of judgment for the rich guests. She was a living story of resilience, kindness, and dignity, waiting for the moment when the truth would shine through and silence the laughter once and for all. The moment finally came when the hall grew quiet. The soft hum of conversation faded and all eyes turned to the stage where the billionaire stood. His presence commanded attention. It's not through force, but through the quiet authority of someone who had seen life in its many forms. The guests straightened in their seats, sensing that something important was about to happen. Even the whispers among the rich guests slowed. Curiosity replacing judgment for a fleeting moment. The billionaire raised his hand slightly, signal that he was about to speak. The widow, still standing near the edge of the room, felt a ripple of nervousness mixed with anticipation. She did not fully understand what was coming, but she sensed that the evening was about to change in ways no one expected. He began to speak, his voice calm yet firm, cutting through the remaining chatter. "Tonight, we gather to celebrate generosity and kindness," he said, looking around the room. But generosity is not always measured in wealth. Sometimes it is measured in choices, in actions that go unnoticed, in lives touched quietly and without recognition. The guests listened politely, nodding and murmuring their agreement, expecting the usual acknowledgement of donations or charity work. But the billionaire's gaze shifted subtly, finding the widow standing near the pillar. There was a moment of silence as his eyes held hers, and in that instant, something in the room seemed to pause. He continued, "Many years ago, when I was struggling and had nothing, a woman I had never met extended kindness to me when she had very little herself. She offered food when I was hungry, shelter when I had nowhere to go, and words of encouragement when hope had left me. I do not know if she remembered or even realized the impact of her actions, but she changed the course of my life." A soft murmur passed through the guests, curiosity turning into intrigue. They looked around, wondering who this woman could be. Their previous judgment began to feel. It's uncomfortable in the quiet of the billionaire's voice. He stepped down slightly from the stage and walked toward the widow. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. As he approached, he spoke with warmth and respect. "This woman is here with us tonight. She has endured hardship, loss, and judgment without ever losing her dignity. She stood by me when no one else would, and for that, I am forever grateful." Gasps rippled through the room. Guests turned their heads to look at the widow, their eyes widening with surprise. The woman who had seemed insignificant, poor, and unworthy in their eyes was the very person who had shaped the life of the billionaire. They all admired. The widow's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sudden recognition that her small acts of kindness had mattered more than she had ever imagined. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, the laughter and judgment of earlier seemed like a distant memory. She realized that the truth she carried had been acknowledged in the most public way possible. The billionaire continued, addressing the room with gentle authority. Tonight I ask everyone to remember that wealth, status, and appearances do not define a person. Character, courage, and kindness do. This woman has lived those values every day of her life, even when the world did not see or recognize her. Some guests looked ashamed, their previous laughter and mockery now feeling heavy in their hearts. Others whispered quietly, finally understanding the depth of the widow's presence among them. The room had shifted from judgment to awe, from amusement to respect. In the span of a few moments, he turned fully toward the widow, extending his hand. Your kindness saved me when I had nothing. I am here tonight to honor you, to make sure that everyone knows the truth of who you are, and to express my deepest gratitude. The widow took a deep breath, steadying herself. She stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. I never expected recognition or reward, she said. I only did what I thought was right. I am grateful that my actions made a difference in your life. That is enough for me. The billionaire shook his head gently, smiling. It is not enough for the world to remain unaware. Tonight, you deserve acknowledgement, respect, and honor. You have shown what true generosity means, and I am proud to stand beside you. The audience broke into applause, not the polite clapping reserved for ceremonies, but sincere, heartfelt appreciation. Many of the guests felt a pang of shame for their earlier behavior. Realizing how quickly they had judged based on appearances alone, others were moved by the story, inspired by the quiet strength of a woman who had faced so much and remained unwavering. The widow's eyes met those of the billionaire, and she saw gratitude, respect, and recognition shining back at her. In that moment, she understood that the evening had fulfilled its true purpose. It was not just about wealth, status, or appearances. It was about acknowledging the quiet, powerful impact of kindness, the unseen courage that shapes lives, and the enduring strength of human spirit. She allowed herself a small, humble smile. The room's laughter and judgment had been replaced by respect and admiration. The rich guests who had mocked her were now learning a lesson in humility, and the widow stood as a symbol of resilience, grace, and the quiet power of goodness. The billionaire's words echoed in the hearts of all present. The widow, once dismissed and laughed at, was now recognized not just by the man whose life she had changed, but by everyone who had witnessed the truth. In that moment, the hall became a place where dignity, courage, and kindness shone brighter than wealth, status, or appearances. And the story of the widow would linger in the minds of all who were present for years to come. The applause continued, filling the grand hall with a sense of awe and reflection. The widow stood beside the billionaire, her hands folded calmly, her face glowing with quiet dignity. She felt a warmth she had not known in years, not from wealth, not from recognition alone, but from the validation of her journey, the acknowledgement of her choices, and the respect of people who had once dismissed her. The guests looked around, some ashamed, others thoughtful. The laughter and judgment that had filled the room earlier had vanished, replaced by curiosity, admiration, and a sense of humility. They began to see that wealth and appearances were not measures of true worth. One by one, they reflected on their own actions and attitudes. Realizing how quickly they had jumped to conclusions about a person whose life they knew nothing about, the billionaire continued speaking, his voice steady and commanding respect. Let tonight be a lesson to all of us. Kindness, courage, and dignity are the true markers of human value. Wealth can fade, appearances can deceive, but character lasts. This woman has proven that, even in the face of hardship, life can be lived with integrity, and even small acts of generosity can change the course of someone's destiny. Guests began to approach the widow, offering apologies and words of admiration. Some spoke quietly, their faces flushed with embarrassment, while others extended hands in a gesture of respect. She accepted their words with grace, acknowledging their change without bitterness. She understood that humility sometimes takes time to learn. and she hoped their lessons were sincere. A few of the women who had laughed at her earlier stepped forward. Their voices were tentative but genuine. "We judged you unfairly," one said softly. "We did not see your courage, your strength, or your kindness. We are sorry." The widow smiled gently. "Thank you," she said. "What matters most is understanding and learning. I forgive, and I hope you remember that appearances do not tell the whole story." The billionaire nodded approvingly, knowing that true recognition was not just about applause or public acknowledgement. It was about the change in hearts, the lessons learned, and the respect given. He gestured to the widow, highlighting her as an example for everyone in the room. This woman's life reminds us all that we should never underestimate the power of compassion. We must honor those who live by their values, even when no one is watching. A quiet hush settled over the room as the guests reflected on the magnitude of the moment. The widow's story had touched them more deeply than any speech or display of wealth could have. They realized that her strength was not measured by what she owned, but by the life she had lived, the kindness she had given, and the dignity she had maintained. The evening continued. But the atmosphere had changed completely. Guests no longer whispered judgment. They discussed lessons, shared reflections, and sought to understand what had brought them all to this moment. The widow moved among them with ease, offering quiet conversation and listening to their stories as well. She did not boast of her past or her impact. She simply shared her presence, her calm strength, and her humility. Some guests asked her how she had managed to endure so much, to maintain her courage and kindness. She spoke simply, sharing the wisdom that had guided her through life. "Life is not measured by wealth or status," she said. "It is measured by how we treat others, how we face hardship, and how we choose to respond to challenges. True strength comes from within, from kindness and courage that do not rely on recognition." Her words resonated deeply with those around her. Many reflected on their own lives, realizing how often they had judged others hastily, forgotten kindness, or allowed pride to overshadow compassion. They began to see that respect and understanding were more valuable than gold or social standing. The billionaire stood beside her, watching quietly, knowing that her presence had transformed the event into something far greater than he had planned. He saw that she had not only endured judgment and humiliation, but had also inspired a change in others. That was the true power of her story. As the evening drew to a close, the widow was invited to a seat of honor. She accepted gracefully, understanding that this recognition was not about her ego, but about the acknowledgement of the principles she had lived by. She felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that no wealth or title could ever provide. The guests, now fully aware of her significance, approached her with newfound respect. They listened to her thoughts, valued her opinions, and treated her as a person of true influence. The laughter and mockery of earlier were forgotten, replaced by admiration and reflection. The billionaire concluded the event by reminding everyone that the evening's lesson was not just for the attendees, but for all who would hear the story later. "We must honor the quiet heroes in our lives," he said. "Those who act with kindness, courage, and integrity, often without recognition. Let us never judge by appearances, and let us remember that the measure of a person lies in their actions, their heart, and their spirit." As the guests departed, many lingered to express their gratitude and apologies to the widow. She accepted each gesture with grace, offering encouragement and reminding them that the lesson was more important than the moment. She knew that her presence had changed the hearts of many, and that the impact of kindness would ripple beyond that hall. Finally, as the night ended and the hall emptied, the widow stepped outside into the cool evening air. She looked up at the city lights, feeling a sense of calm she had not known in years. The journey had been long, difficult, and filled with challenges, but she had endured. She had been judged unfairly, laughed at, and dismissed, yet she had maintained her dignity, her courage, and her kindness. In the quiet of the night, she allowed herself a small smile. She had faced adversity and emerged not just intact, but honored and respected. The truth of her life had been revealed, not through wealth or power, but through integrity and compassion. The lessons of the evening would stay with the guests for years to come. They would remember the woman who had endured so much and had shown that true greatness is measured not by what you have, but by how you live, how you treat others, and how you respond to the trials of life. The widow walked slowly toward home, carrying with her not gold or titles, but the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, and the knowledge that her story had touched hearts, changed minds, and reminded the world that kindness and courage are the truest forms of wealth. Even after the event, the story of the widow and her quiet courage continued to spread. People spoke about the evening for weeks, retelling the moment when the billionaire revealed her past and acknowledged the kindness she had shown when it had mattered most. Those who had laughed at her now felt a deep sense of shame, mixed with awe as they realized that they had been wrong in their judgment. The widow's life, which had once been hidden in quiet struggle, was now recognized not for wealth or appearances, but for integrity and heart. After the event, the widow returned to her modest home. It was small, plain, and filled with memories of simpler times. The streets she walked daily were the same ones she had navigated for years, but now she carried with her a quiet confidence. She had faced judgment and ridicule and had come out stronger, courage and kindness validated in the most public way possible. Word spread about the billionaire's acknowledgement. Some of the guests returned to their usual lives, but many began to reflect on how they had treated others. The widow became a symbol in the city, a reminder that true worth is measured by character rather than wealth, and by actions rather than appearances. People who had once overlooked her started reaching out, not to take advantage, but to learn from her story and understand what it truly meant to live with dignity and kindness. The widow received letters, small gifts, and messages from people touched by her story. Some were strangers who had never met her, but were inspired by the example she had set. Others were neighbors or distant acquaintances who had forgotten her in the past, but now sought to reconnect and express admiration. Each message reminded her that life's impact is often far greater than what one can see in the moment. Despite the attention, she remained humble. She did not seek fame, reward, or recognition. She continued her simple life, helping where she could, offering advice and comfort, and acting with the same quiet courage that had defined her life. She found joy in the small things: a neighbor's smile, a meal shared, a kind word offered when it was needed most. These moments were more valuable to her than any applause or accolade. The billionaire continued to support and acknowledge her, visiting her modest home from time to time, ensuring that she was comfortable and cared for. Their bond was not based on wealth or social standing, but on mutual respect and the recognition of a past act of kindness that had changed a life. He encouraged others to follow her example, emphasizing that generosity and courage can have profound effects far beyond what anyone might imagine. As time went on, the widow's story inspired initiatives within the city. Programs were started to honor acts of kindness, to support those who had endured hardship with dignity, and to recognize courage in everyday life. The focus shifted from wealth and status to character and heart, reminding everyone that small, thoughtful actions can leave lasting impressions. The widow herself became a mentor and guide to others facing challenges. She spoke to groups about resilience, courage, and the power of kindness. She shared her experiences not to boast, but to encourage, showing that even in the face of loss and struggle, life can be meaningful and impactful. She emphasized that humility, patience, and generosity are strengths often overlooked in a world obsessed with appearances. Through her guidance, many learned to approach life differently. They saw the value in helping others quietly, acting with integrity even when no one is watching, and understanding that true influence comes from character rather than material possessions. The widow became a quiet leader in the community. Her influence subtle but profound. Her story also reached people far beyond the city. Media outlets, social networks, and word of mouth shared the tale of the widow and the billionaire, showing how acts of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple through lives and change the course of events. People everywhere were reminded that judging someone by their appearance or circumstances often leads to misunderstanding and missed opportunities to connect over the years. The widow lived a life of quiet fulfillment. She continued to help, inspire, and lead by example, knowing that her actions mattered more than recognition. The lessons she had lived, the value of kindness, courage, and integrity remained at the heart of her life, guiding her every choice. As she grew older, the widow's presence became a cornerstone of the community. Young people looked to her for guidance, adults sought her counsel, and even the wealthy guests, who had once laughed now, approached her with respect, understanding that their earlier judgments had been shallow. They learned that true wealth is not measured by money, but by the lives one touches, the hearts one uplifts, and the integrity one maintains. The billionaire, always mindful of the impact she had on his life, continued to honor her, ensuring that her story would never be forgotten. Together, they worked quietly to encourage acts of kindness, to support those who had endured hardship, and to remind the city that human values surpass material wealth. In her final years, the widow often reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered the struggles, the loss, the judgment, and the moments of doubt. She also remembered the choices she had made, the acts of generosity, and the courage that had carried her through. She realized that her life, though filled with challenges, had been rich in meaning, purpose, and impact. Even after she was gone, her story lived on. The lessons she imparted continued to inspire people, reminding them that kindness, courage, and integrity are the true measures of a person's life. Those who had once judged her now carried her example in their hearts, striving to act with the same quiet strength and generosity that had defined her years. Her legacy became a beacon for future generations, a story retold to children, shared in communities, and remembered as proof that even one person's actions can change lives, inspire change, and remind the world that dignity, kindness, and courage are the greatest gifts one can offer. The widow had shown that no matter how humble one's circumstances, the impact of living with heart and purpose can reach far beyond what anyone might imagine, touching countless lives and leaving the world a better place than it had been before.